Coming up, what is the state of philanthropy in Indian country? And a Lumbee professor shares a new study on cancer research in North Carolina. Plus, the Interior Department releases Volume 1 of its long-anticipated Federal Indian Boarding School report. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amirawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We start with the investigation many have waited for. On Wednesday, the Department of Interior released the first volume of its investigative report on federal Indian boarding schools. The report showed there were at least 408 boarding schools run by the federal government between the years 1819 and 1969. Approximately 53 of these schools had been identified as places with marked and unmarked burial sites. A map shows these schools were located across 37 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. Secretary Deb Haaland spoke at the press conference.
I come from ancestors who endured the horrors of the Indian boarding school assimilation policies carried out by the same department that I now lead.
James LaBelle Sr. is an Inupiaq boarding school survivor. He said the report is just a beginning. Also in attendance was Ramona Klein, who is almost 75 years old. She, too, is a boarding school survivor. She told ICT she hopes the report educates everyday Americans about the atrocities Native children faced.
Today, I am launching a year-long tour, The Road to Healing. I will travel across the country to use my platform to elevate American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian survivors of the federal Indian boarding school system and give them the opportunity to share their stories, help connect communities with trauma-informed support, and facilitate the collection of a permanent oral history. This is one step among many that we will take.
The 106-page report also highlighted conditions Indigenous children endured at these schools. The final list of schools is expected to grow as the research continues. After years of delays, an important inquiry will begin this fall. It will examine the experiences and deaths of Innu children in provincial care in Canada's Newfoundland and Labrador. APTN's Angel Moore has the story.
Wally Rich of the Natwashish Innu Nation was only 15 years old and in provincial care when he took his own life 2 years ago. Wally's mother, Nympha Rich, was too upset to speak on camera, but sent APTN News a text message saying the system has been failing and, "I lost my son because of their system. He was in care for many years, and I always got told my boys are safe and you don't have to worry about it. That's what they always said." The Innu Nation includes the Sheshatshiu and Natwashish communities, are north of Happy Valley Goose Bay. Innu children placed in provincial care are often removed from their communities, which may be to another province. Innu Nation Grand Chief Etienne Rich says culture and language are lost.
They come back home after for several years, and then they don't have that language. They couldn't even communicate with their grandparents. That's a sad thing about it.
Innu leaders hope to find answers through this inquiry.
The system doesn't work for us, and has gone for so many years been like that. And I think it's time to change, and I think to identify what exactly the problems are.
A press release said the 3 commissioners will focus on systemic causes of mistreatment, cultural and community impacts. They'll meet with Innu leadership to discuss the needs of Innu families and investigate individual cases of youth who've lost their lives. Grand Chief Rich is looking forward to working with the commissioners.
We've been saying that for so many decades that the system doesn't work for the Innu, and we're the ones who will tell you what's best for the Innu, because we're the ones who know. We're the ones who live in this system, doesn't work, and hurting our people and our elders.
The government of Newfoundland and Labrador is funding the inquiry $4 million, and it will take 18 months to complete. Hearings may begin next fall. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabottuk, also known as Halifax.
Well, after 2 years of virtual events, the arena, the Stanford powwow, was filled once again. Students at Stanford University hosted their 51st annual event over the weekend. It is held in honor of Mother's Day. This powwow is run entirely by students, all of which are simultaneously taking classes and tests. The Stanford powwow attracts an estimated 30,000 people and is one of the largest gatherings at the university overall. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, the Interior Department releases its boarding school report and more on cancer research. But first, the state of philanthropy in Indian country. Stay with us. Generosity is a core value shared by many Indigenous communities around the world. But what does that mean today? That is exactly what the organization Native Americans in Philanthropy wants to find out. Eric Stegman is its CEO, and he joins us now. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
You've been holding a listening tour with one coming up very soon. Tell us about that, and what are you finding out?
Sure. One of the things when I started as the CEO here at Native Americans in Philanthropy a little over 2 years ago was that a lot of the issues that funders out there wanted to invest in and partner on really needed to involve our tribal governments. A lot of them were looking to invest in our education systems and our child welfare systems and all sorts of other things, but our tribal leaders really weren't at the table. And as we started to talk to tribal leaders out in the field, we started to realize that they really didn't understand the philanthropic sector. It's a really strange sector, but it's important. And so we decided to launch a national listening tour where we've been going out to regions across the country and co-hosting conversations with tribal leaders, staff, and partner organizations to just better understand how they see philanthropy and where they want to have a voice in it.
And what exactly are they telling you in terms of how they see philanthropy?
There's a lot of lack of understanding about the field, which is, understandable. It's a very Western, institution. There's a lot of money on the table, but it's being directed by a lot of, non-native foundations and donors. And I think what we're really hearing from them is that they realize there's opportunity, but they don't understand how to set the table the right way where their voice is really going to be heard and actually result in money. I think a lot of tribes who have worked with philanthropic institutions have not seen a lot of result, or they've had funders that have needed a lot of reporting from them or wanted them to do things in a way they didn't see as their own. So I think what we're learning is that we really needed to have a collective voice for tribal leaders to actually tell the sector what they need and what they expect of them, especially because so much of the wealth in the sector was generated off of our stolen land. So.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that, how land back is actually a way to integrate philanthropy. I think that idea, you mentioned this already, philanthropy is that kind of word that everyone kind of knows what it means, but it's up for interpretation. So how do you in particular define that in Indian country?
Yeah, I think philanthropy is a result of the Western systems that developed it. So, it was a way for wealth to be redistributed, but by those who are already in power with their own money. And so I think as we look at it as Native people, we all have some intrinsic value to our cultures and communities around reciprocity, around how we share our resources. So one of the biggest reasons I think it's really hard for us to understand what the philanthropic sector is that as Native people, it doesn't align at all with our worldview. So a lot of what we're trying to do at Native Americans in Philanthropy is to invest in our leadership to be able to talk to that sector in a different way, and really help transform the sector in a way that actually aligns more with our own worldview, so that they're not just looking at it as a charity, and it's really more about reciprocity in the way we see it.
At a lot of mainstream philanthropy organizations, there's corporate boards that sort of say, we should invest in this, we should start looking at this. And so often we're seeing that corporate boards don't have Indigenous representation. Maybe talk about that.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more work to do here. So one of the things that I really have the honor to do is to work with a lot of our Indigenous professionals who've worked in philanthropy for a long time. Our organization is actually over 30 years old and was founded by Native people who worked in philanthropy. This issue of leadership on boards has been a really big deal for a long time. I think what we have that is really creating a lot of momentum is a lot more Native leadership starting to come onto boards, but not just boards, executive positions like CEOs. We have Native people working in the sector now who are over multi-billion-dollar foundations, and that really matters. They're really helping build power in how we bring on some of those Native leaders into those board positions. What we're going to be trying to do is to really invest in more leadership and support programming so that Native people from across the field can better understand what it means to be a board member and how to leverage that power, so that when we're recommending them to these foundations and corporate institutions, that they feel like they really know what they need to do with their voice there. Because I think too often they become a checkbox, they get marginalized, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen as we do build out more leadership.
That is so important. The more that I learn about this, I don't even know what the responsibility of a corporate board member is or what the time commitment is like. It really seems like something that could use a lot more research. So I've heard that before. When you're thinking about thought leaders and thinking about Indigenous people who are already on corporate boards or who are leading the industry, who do you think of?
Well, one of my closest partners and I think mentors in the space for a long time has been Nicole Maher, who runs the Group Health Foundation in Seattle. I think what she's done with a relatively new foundation has been remarkable because she's brought so many Indigenous voices, Indigenous rural voices into that work in Washington State. And at the same time, because she's a CEO over such a wealthy foundation, she has a lot of influence in the field. And there's several others like that who are doing that work. And we're looking forward to building a bigger network of all of those amazing leaders out there to help us in our work.
Well, Eric Stegman, thank you so much.
Great. It was great to be here. I appreciate it.
May is National Cancer Research Month. In North Carolina, current data shows that cancer is the leading cause of death for Native people. One Lumbee professor is leading efforts in the state to better understand how widespread this issue is. Ronnie Bell is a professor of social science and health policy at the Wake Forest Medical School, and he joins us now to tell us about these efforts. Professor Bell, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right in here. I understand that this new study is bringing together 3 universities in North Carolina, but tell us more about it.
Sure. So my role, I serve as the Associate Director for Community Outreach and Engagement for the Wake Forest Baptist Comprehensive Cancer Center here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And here in North Carolina, we have 3 National Cancer Institute designated comprehensive cancer centers, ours at Wake Forest, one at Duke University, and one at UNC Lineberger. And so we all got together, so my counterparts at Duke and UNC got together and said, here we are in North Carolina, we have 8 tribes, we have the largest American Indian population in the eastern United States, but we're really not serving well those communities. And so my heritage, I'm Lumbee Indian by heritage. And so we got together and formulated this partnership called the Southeastern American Indian Cancer Health Equity Partnership, which formally launched in July of 2021. So we're relatively new. And as a part of this partnership, we developed this grant to the V Foundation to work more closely with our tribes here in the state to learn more about the true cancer burden in our state, as well as get a sense of the assets within these communities to help address the burden of cancer.
As you're approaching this research and this study, what questions in particular are you hoping to address?
We're really hoping to get a better understanding of what capacity tribes have to address the cancer burden in their communities. We also hope to get an understanding of what data is currently available. In many tribal communities across the country, really, there's just not a lot of data on incidents and deaths from cancer, for cancer screening rates, stage of diagnosis. So, cancer is, one of those conditions that is very burdensome on communities. And so we want to be able to come out of this and answer a lot of questions about, first of all, what data is available, but it also to say, what data do we need to be collecting to get a better understanding of what's going on in our state.
And I understand you're partnering with the organization Victory Ride. Tell us about that.
So the Victory Ride is part of a fundraising event by the V Foundation. The V Foundation was started as a result of the Jim Valvano, who was a very famous college basketball coach back in the 80s and 90s. And he died from brain cancer. And so the V Foundation has a victory ride every year, and they use that to raise money for research. And so we were able to submit a grant to the V Foundation through their collaborative research funding mechanism to do this work. And they were very excited to partner with us on this. And the grant formally kicked off on May the 1st. And so we're looking forward to really getting in and working with the tribal communities here and helping them better understand what's going on in the cancer space.
So it sounds like participants of this year's Victory Ride, if they take part, will be able to raise some money specifically for your research.
Correct. That is correct.
That is so fun. I'm really curious if you can talk about what kinds of cancers you think, just from your preliminary research, are impacting Native people in North Carolina so far.
So probably the biggest one I would say is lung cancer. We have very high rates of harmful tobacco use here in our tribal communities, largely because, we're here in the South where people grow a lot of tobacco, and that there's been that economic connection to tobacco, as well as the cultural connection, but specifically that economic connection to tobacco. And so the rates that we see for smoking here in North Carolina among our tribes is up around 25% among adults. We don't know a whole lot about what the rates are in children. And so, definitely lung cancer. We also see very high rates of colorectal cancer, prostate cancer. American Indian men are about 70% more likely to die from prostate cancer than non-Hispanic white men. So we really see a lot of that, a lot of those cancers that we see nationally affect tribal communities, but what we do see is that rate of dying or having an adverse outcome from these cancers is more problematic for our tribal communities.
We only have about 30 seconds left, but I want to make sure I ask you this question, and that's when the study is anticipated to be done and finished.
So it's a one-year grant. So we'll finish next April and so we have these three very large aims, and we hope to be able to achieve them in a relatively short amount of time.
Well, we'll look forward to having you back in a year when you can tell us what you found. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'd love to come back.
The Interior Department released some findings from its long-awaited federal boarding school investigation on Wednesday. Secretary Deb Haaland spoke at a press conference to share the news. Also in attendance was Deborah Parker. She is the CEO of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. She's a citizen of the Tulalip tribes and of Yaqui and Apache descent. Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Tikwitsi, thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Start us off by telling us what you really collected from the atmosphere at this press conference. What was going through your mind and through your heart?
Well, I think at that moment, we were with boarding school survivors and Secretary Haaland, Assistant Secretary Brian Newland, and many staff members who worked on the report. And the feeling of like, this is our moment and this is our time to tell our stories. It was both exciting, but mostly overwhelming, mostly filled with a lot of pain and sorrow and grief, and also that mix of hope that maybe this is the time we get to tell our stories, and this is the time we get to be together, especially having a Native American woman at the helm of the interior. So it was such a special time to be together and to support each other in this education and this movement.
Maybe talk about that experience of non-Native people being able to learn about boarding schools now for the first time. I've been seeing a lot of discourse online talking about how your average everyday American had never really learned about this, but all of a sudden, now it's something that they're paying attention to. Maybe talk about that.
Well, unfortunately, the truth about the Indian boarding schools has not been shared in public education to the extent where people understand the depth of what occurred in these public school systems and these boarding school systems. And so we believe the time is now. The time is now for us to have that conversation, not only with our loved ones and within our communities, but also the wider community needs to understand, meaning the United States, globally, what happened to Indigenous nations, and we deserve to know, what happened to our children that were forced to attend these schools. We deserve to know the number of children who were abused, died, or went missing at these schools, and also the long-term impacts on the children and the families that were forced to attend Indian boarding schools. So we have a right to all of that, and it is absolutely the time. And I know people are asking why now, why a congressional hearing, why a federal Indian boarding school initiative investigative report. Well, it's because it hasn't been done in the way that it needs to. And also our elders they're getting up in age, those who attended the assimilative boarding schools. And so we need to hear their testimonies. We need to collect the data and the information before too much time passes.
You talked a lot about survivors, and in so many Native communities, there's the elder, the grandma, the grandpa who maybe is seeing the news now and reopening some wounds. What advice do you have for young people who are wanting to approach and support our elders who are maybe going through a tough time right now?
Well, I think that we have to turn to our traditional practices. We need to, listen to our elders. And bring them. My grandma always says, bring gifts, bring yourself most of all, and just sit with your elders, spend time with them, have tea, coffee, listen to their stories, listen to their hurts, and hold on to them. Hold on to them and believe their stories and just support them. And so as long as we're in a loving space and we approach our elders with that respect, then we open the doors for that communications. And I hope that our relatives feel like now is a safe time to tell their stories, and that our communities will embrace them and we'll love them even more. So I don't want any of our relatives to feel like they're not important, because they are, and their stories truly matter.
I want to touch base on one last point before this interview ends, and that's the fact that you're also in Washington, D.C. to testify before the House Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples for a specific piece of legislation. Tell us about what that legislation is and what it hopes to accomplish.
The legislation is the Senate Bill 2907 and HR 5444, and the bill is the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. And that's the bill we wish to pass so that we can find out more about these stories.
Deborah, do you have any last words for us?
No, just sending my love to all the Indigenous nations and the peoples who have suffered through generations of trauma. And I know that we have a strong voice, and when we come together, we're stronger. And I know our ancestors are looking upon us to stand together. So that's my prayer for them. And I appreciate this time, Indian country today. And I just send my prayers and hopes and dreams out to our boarding school survivors.
Well, Deborah Parker, thank you so much for being here and for doing this work.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.